Welcome to Seductive Chronicles. In today's video, before we begin, I need to ask you something. Have you ever lived through a moment so small, so unremarkable on the surface, that your brain almost filed it under nothing, and then later, hours later, maybe even days later, you found yourself thinking about it again? Not because something dramatic happened, not because someone said something that cut deep or changed your life in an obvious way, but because something shifted, quietly, almost without permission. A glance that lasted half a second too long. A sound you weren't expecting in a room you thought was empty. The way someone said your name and you couldn't explain why it lingered. If you're the kind of person who notices those things, who finds meaning in the margins of ordinary life, who's more moved by a quiet Tuesday afternoon than a loud Saturday night, then I want you to know, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. This channel isn't about big, theatrical storytelling. It's not about explosions of emotion or plot twists that demand your reaction. It's about the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that sneaks in through a cracked window and sits with you long after you've closed it. Those are the stories I want to tell. Those are the moments worth examining. Because once you start noticing them, you genuinely can't stop. The world reorganizes itself around these tiny, invisible pivots. And life starts to feel less like a series of events and more like a collection of sensations you almost missed. So if that resonates with you, if you're someone who slows down when everyone else speeds up, hit subscribe, because we're just getting started, and there's so much more to notice together. My name is Claire Matthews. I'm 33 years old, and I've spent the last 6 years living in a quiet neighborhood in Springfield, Illinois. The kind of neighborhood that doesn't make headlines, the kind where nothing particularly notable has ever happened. And somehow that feels like the whole point. Saturday mornings here have a texture to them. You hear lawnmowers starting up across the street before you've even finished your first cup of coffee. Neighbors wave from their driveways, a short, familiar lift of the hand, even when they can't quite place your name. Dogs bark at nothing, or maybe at everything. It's hard to tell. And a few houses down, kids ride their bikes in wide, wobbly circles while the afternoon light begins its slow slide toward gold. Their laughter carries just far enough to reach you. Just enough to remind you that the world is still moving. It's not exciting. This place, it's not meant to be. But I've come to believe that steady has its own kind of beauty. That there is something deeply underrated about a life that doesn't constantly demand your adrenaline. I've been married to my husband, Daniel, for almost 10 years now. 10 years. That number sits differently every time I say it. A decade of shared grocery lists written in our own shorthand. A decade of knowing, without asking, that he takes his coffee with 1 sugar and just enough milk to turn it the right shade of warm, beige. A decade of comfortable silences, the kind where you don't feel pressure to perform, to be interesting, to fill the air with words just to prove you're still present. We are not the couple from the movies. We don't have dramatic airport reunions or tearful last-minute confessions. We don't argue loudly or love loudly. What we have is quieter than that. And I mean quieter as a compliment of the highest order. Our love is the kind that doesn't need witnesses. It's lived in the mundane. In the way he moves around me in the kitchen without bumping into me. In the way I already know, before he speaks, which way the conversation is going to turn. From the outside, I imagine our life looks like a painting of a painting, a copy of something ordinary. But from the inside, it feels like being held. Our days run on patterns, not rigid ones, not the kind that feel like a schedule you're trapped inside, but soft, familiar rhythms that give shape to the week. Mornings begin with coffee at the kitchen counter. Around 7:30, the sunlight comes through the window at exactly the right angle and catches the backsplash in a way that makes the whole kitchen glow like something out of a memory. I always pause for that. Just a second. Just long enough to notice. I work at the local library. It's the kind of job that people hear about and assume is quiet. And they're right, but it's a particular kind of quiet that not everyone understands. It's not empty. It's full. Full of other people's stories, stacked floor to ceiling. Stories more dramatic than mine, more complicated, more heartbreaking and hilarious and strange. And yet every evening, I leave all of that behind and come home to my own small, steady reality. And somehow that feels like the right order of things. Dinner is usually at 6, sometimes earlier when neither of us has energy to wait, sometimes later when we get absorbed in something and forget, but almost always together. And after dinner, if the weather is willing, we walk. Just around the block. Sometimes we talk about inconsequential things, something funny that happened at the library, something he heard on the radio. Sometimes we don't talk at all. Just walk beside each other in the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. For a long time, I thought this was everything. Not as a resignation, but as a completion. Like all the important things had already settled into place, and what remained was simply the living of it. It was a late summer afternoon, the kind of afternoon that feels like the season is finally exhaling warm, but not oppressive. Soft around the edges. There was a faint smell of freshly cut grass drifting in through the kitchen window. The kind of scent that makes you nostalgic for something you can't quite name. Like childhood, maybe? Or the feeling of having nowhere to be. I had music playing, something acoustic and unhurried. The kind of background that doesn't demand your attention, just gently fills the corners of the room. I was cooking dinner. And not just cooking, I was attempting to impress my friend. Megan is one of those people who makes everything she touches look effortless. She'll come over with a bottle of wine, spend 20 minutes in your kitchen, and produce something that looks like it should be in a photograph. She doesn't just cook, she composes. And every time I know she's coming, I feel this lull pressure, not spoken, not even conscious, really to meet her somewhere near that standard. Even though, if I'm honest with myself, I never quite do. Daniel had mentioned earlier that his coworker Ethan might stop by at some point that afternoon. He needed to return a screwdriver he'd borrowed. I'd met Ethan before a handful of times at casual gatherings, the kind of situations where you exchange easy pleasantries and don't think much about it afterward. He's tall and calm, polite in a way that felt entirely natural, not performed. The kind of person who carries a certain settled quality, like someone who doesn't get rattled easily, doesn't panic in the small crises of daily life. If I'd had to describe him in a single phrase, I would have said, quietly present. And that was it. That was the entirety of what he was to me at that point. A familiar, uncomplicated face. By late afternoon, the house had shifted into that particular pre-guest energy. Not chaotic exactly, but not calm either. It exists somewhere between the two, a buzzing, humming state of preparedness that you perform without fully acknowledging. The counters got wiped twice. They didn't need to be wiped twice. The candles were placed, reconsidered, moved slightly to the left, moved back. The hand towel in the bathroom was straightened at least 3 times. The music volume went up, then down, then up again by 2 increments. It's funny how rituals like these carry the shape of control when really what they are is barely managed. Anticipation. I was setting the table when I remembered the bread rolls. Tucked in the pantry, bottom shelf, naturally, because of course, that's where they were. I walked over, humming quietly with the music, and bent down to reach for the basket. The wooden floor gave that small familiar creak beneath me. Just a sound. Just the house settling, the way houses do. And then footsteps, closer than I expected. I turned around quickly. Too quickly. My heart made a small, involuntary leap. Not dramatic, not the kind you'd describe to someone later, just a brief internal jolt. Like a system alert that resolves itself in under a second. It was Ethan, standing a few feet behind. Me, holding the screwdriver, looking mildly amused. "Claire," he said, with a soft, easy laugh. "I didn't mean to sneak up on you." I laughed too, but mine came out just slightly thinner than I intended, like the volume had been turned down on my own reaction. "I didn't hear you come in," I said. Daniel had probably let him in through the side door while he was out in the garden. In our neighborhood, formality gives way to familiarity after a certain point. People don't always knock. They come through the side gate, call out a hello that may or may not be heard, and find their way in. It's comfortable. It's community. It usually feels easy, but in that moment, it just felt noticeable. There was a particular awareness in the air. The kind you recognize from elevators, or from standing just slightly too close to someone in a queue at the grocery store. Not uncomfortable. Not charged with anything I could name. Just heightened, somehow. Like the room had become a little more three-dimensional. I stood up, set the bread basket on the counter, and said something about a big dinner, gesturing vaguely at the organized chaos behind me. He smiled. "You'll do fine." We talked for maybe a minute. Food, recipes, the easy, surface-level conversation that two people have when they're waiting for someone else to walk back into the room. Then Daniel came in from the garden, drying his hands on a rag, saying something about the state of the tomato plants. And just like that, the moment dissolved. It folded back into the ordinary flow of the evening. Quiet and unremarkable, gone, or so I thought. Because here is the thing that surprised me. That thing I keep returning to. That moment, 10 seconds, maybe less, stayed with me. Not because anything happened, not because of Ethan specifically, not because of anything inappropriate or complicated or worth examining in that way. It stayed with me for a completely different reason. It interrupted the rhythm. Up until that point, my days had existed as a kind of straight line. Predictable, warm, reliable. One thing leading to the next with a kind of choreography I'd stopped noticing, and that moment, that small, almost invisible pause between reaching for the bread and standing back up, felt like a tiny crack in that line. Not a fracture, not damage, just a hairline interruption. A place where the pattern broke, just for a second, and something else came through. And what came through wasn't anything dramatic. It was just awareness. A sharp, sudden clarity about the fact that life is not only the things you plan, it is also the accidental geometry of other people moving through your space at unexpected angles. It is the things you didn't schedule, didn't anticipate, didn't even register until you were lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling with the ceiling fan, turning slow circles above you. Those unscripted seconds, those micro-interruptions, those moments where your ordinary day briefly, gently, collides with something it wasn't expecting. Those are the moments, I've come to believe, that actually carry weight. Not because they're significant in any traditional sense, but because they remind you that you are a living person inside a living world. And the living world does not always follow your agenda. And somehow, impossibly, quietly, those are the moments that change you. Not all at once, not in ways you can measure or explain to anyone, but slowly. The way light shifts across a room. The way seasons change, without fanfare, without announcement, just a creak in the floor, a laugh that came out thinner than expected, gay in the sudden, certain feeling that your days are not as predictable as you thought they were, and maybe, that's exactly the point. That's it for today's story on Seductive Chronicles. If this is the kind of quiet You want more of the kind that makes you slow down? Look closer, feel the texture of ordinary life a little more deeply than you already know what to do. Subscribe. Because the world is absolutely full of these moments, and once you start noticing them, you cannot stop. I'll see you in the next one.